Welcome back to Final Fantasy XIV. So now we're climbing Taejin's tower, which is probably the longest dungeon of the game when you get it right down to it. Well,
it's at the very least one of the more complex, so it's at least a bit of a change.
Basically, it's kind of the crystal tower of this game in the sense that you have to climb it to the top, and not every floor is built equal. Meaning you have to kind of solve a kind of mini floor maze to get through.
Also, isn't it weird that the rail you go up looks like it's from a music stream with the dots looking like actual music?
That's
for later.
That's a nice touch, I will admit.
Well, it's actually in universe, Jova, but it will become apparent for one specific hunting mission later.
All right, second tier. No, Hope, I am not okay. No.
This is actually a vertical dungeon, so at the very least the sneaking around is more manageable.
Hey, it's you.
The
gonna do something?
Dahaka
is the dominator of the place.
God damn it, Dahaka! Like, are you actually okay.
So, Tio, better or worse than the Dahaka Prince of Persia 2?
The two thrones. Well, that one was...
No.
Sorry, Warrior Within. Well, that was more persistent, you know. This is basically one particular obstacle. I could tell you that it's slightly better than the one from Final Fantasy IX, so there is that for what it's worth.
How nice of him. He opened up a path for us.
Oh no, this is slightly important.
Basically, to continue ascending at Taejin's tower, basically, to continue ascending Taejin's tower, you have to basically free these statues who are alive, and they need your help for shit. So let's see what this guy. So let's see what this guy wants.
This makes me wonder: was it intentional that the Dahaka did something that ended up helping us?
He was trying to attack the party, though.
Yeah.
So
he's an asshole. A tremendous terror. So yeah, basically we have to do some side quests, as in hunting missions for these guys. Basically, kill it. Fortunately, the enemies are usually relatively close to each individual statue, so you don't have to, you know, like, don't worry. Fortunately, they're not like on another. It may seem like at shore, but it's actually not as bad as it seems.
It's more of a case of prove your valor to the statues more than, you know, do a chore for them.
Since it's a main story objective, the map will actually tell you where to go anyway, so you'll be fine.
But to be fair, yeah, like you said,
yeah, right there.
I could say.
Go on.
Sorry.
No, go on.
Again, I could say it's a bit better plot-wise than the 109. Nothing technically wrong with that, but it was just literally kind of a throwaway boss to get into Ibsen's castle because you needed a final boss at the end to tell you, oh, you're never gonna get the mirror. I love the guy. The name of this plans, Gelat Titan. Get it? Gelat Titan. All the plans have these having these funny names connected to, you know, desserts.
Juggle, and that's done.
There we go. Oh, mind you, Jova, for that game 9, for some reason Richard Marcaniwood decided to change the name of that beast into like Tarkan or something, and I don't understand why.
Weird.
There we go. With again, the honor of the statues is symbolized by restoring their sword. That usually are spawned also next to the next one that you need to take.
Yeah. So let's see what this one wants. This time it wants us to kill an
infernal machine.
An infernal machine, specifically Ambling Bellows. Okay.
An infernal machine. Never heard that one.
It's one of those cases where I feel like the dungeon would have been better served if it was just climbing and, you know, figuring out the passageways. I feel like these bounties are just here to pad out for time, to be honest with you.
Definitely.
Okay, let me put it like this. I think the fact that it's one of the most basic bout of side quests doesn't help it, where it's literally just, hey, go here, kill X, come back.
It's also the way they're presented, Jova. Again, they're presented just exactly like the side quest of, the Sea of Stones, which in itself is not potentially a problem because it allows better organization with the anti-missions that you do have, but at the same time it makes them kind of feel cheap because it basically tells that it has the same value, and instead of actually being presented as this test or trial that these Menhirim are actually asking you about.
It's probably a direct result of the rush development too.
Yeah.
I can get what you mean. Like, I mean, yeah, I mean, with Final Fantasy VII Remake, you could argue that a lot of those side quests just amount to go here, do X. What helps is the presentation of those side quests, and the fact that they do come with cutscenes, different bouts of presentation here and there, and not to mention that the rewards you get for them are nice, fully and flowing throughout the game here and there.
Yeah, that's why I've been we were quite praising of Ni no Kuni 2 side quests, because when you boil down Ni no Kuni 2 side quests, they're basically the same thing. Go here, kill this, go here, get that. But the game did such a great job in dressing them up with really great mini storylines that made them really entertaining, and this game doesn't really do that. So,
and mind you, I'd argue that even by the time that this game was made in, like, say, 2010, I'd argue that side quests were getting better at this point, still to the point where this feels lackluster.
Well, honestly, Jova, even before that, again, Final Fantasy XII in terms of side quests completely takes a huge fat dump on this game.
True, yeah.
mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just so baffling how this game turned out like this. Like, even stuff that it technically does right, it still feels lame at best.
Like I said, Jova, it's abundantly, again, when you realize the development, suddenly it all makes sense. The reason this is like this is because they had to basically put this thing together within the last year or so. So basically they couldn't afford to put in too much signed content. They had to get the campaign working and fully finished, and basically didn't really have any time to do anything else, really.
I get wanting to prioritize the main thing you're doing before adding anything else, but I guess the issue was they spent a lot of time on that.
Knowing what we know now, would you at least say that by that year they at least knew what they wanted the game to be? Or were they still trying to figure that out in its last year of development still?
Remember, Jova, the reason most of the maps in this game are as linear and shallow as they are is exactly because they couldn't afford to take the time to produce anything more elaborate. They had so basically they just had to make the most basic game they could make that would be at the very least something presentable, basically.
Oh, I get that. What I'm wondering is that they at least have the full picture in mind
No.
by the last year,
So
or
if
were
I
they
recall
still...
correctly,
Basically, yes.
Proving your valor to the statue is not just for showing.
Because now they can fight off the Dahaka.
Yeah, and bit by bit chop a part of its pieces to make him weaker.
You know,
I'll be
Swashbuckling
damned.
kind of sucks at his job.
Well, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I mean, at this point, he has basically outlived its purpose in our parasitic presence.
Do they look sad to you, Vanille? They only have like one facial expression. I don't know how you even...
I guess she felt it.
The way they tilted their heads down.
okay, of course. So there's been a disturbance in the force, and Vanille feels it.
Basically.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, as if Millie's voice has cried out in terror.
Good job.
And they're still crying out in terror.
Thanks, Fang. Yeah, that was a very good reflection on it. Good job.
I guess that's the game patting you in the back. I don't know.
I don't know, like, I mean, well, even in the Overfield, okay, not gonna act like all of them have been winners, but even for Overfield dialogue, that felt kind of just...
Oh, even in general, Jova, the Overfield dialogue, as you have tested both in your journey and this, it's probably the most shallow part when it comes to the actual character interactions.
Oh, that's the thing. Oh, that's the thing. Even by those standards, that particular one there was just like about I give up.
Telling you we can proceed. Let's move.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you know, okay, at least in the earlier parts of the game, they at least tried to have some semblance of conversation with the Overfield dialogue, but that just felt like an admission to
Okay,
defeat.
if I recall correctly, this one is a bit different. Well, it still gives you that kind of quest mission, but if I recall correctly, unless it's the automatically a trigger. Okay, then. Again, it's been a while since I played it myself. So.
Again, you never said...
Pleasing the Menirim also allows to change the rings of Taejin's tower, which unlocks new routes for the elevator.
Yep. So basically, that's the basic idea of the game. Just keep doing statues favors, and they'll unlock the new paths for you until you get to the top of the tower. Basically.
At its core, it's actually classic type of dungeon
Yeah,
crawling. I actually can dig that. Although
Oh, no.
doing this kind of in reverse.
This is the most elaborate dungeon of the game because all the other dungeons revolve to nothing but just keep walking forward till you reach the goal, really. So this is
Even
the first.
the final dungeon is kind of victim of that.
Yeah, so this is the only dungeon in the game that actually feels properly. I'm pretty convinced that this was the first dungeon they came up with before the final stretch. And by the time, here's what happened, to follow up on what you were saying, Jova. Here's what probably happened. By the time they got to the final stretch where they finally had a proper vision, only this dungeon was complete. And since at the time they only had like a year or so to finish the whole bloody thing, they had to basically rush out all the other dungeons, and that's why this is the only dungeon that feels finished.
So which do you think would be more sad, Pedro? If that's the case, or if the idea that, you know, with Pulse being what feels like a last-minute addition, what if this whole dungeon was also a last-minute addition? Because again, like, I mean, okay, I get it. They like to do different stuff here and there, but it really does feel like all Pulse, except for, you know, the Werba Village, was a last-minute addition because they realized, hey, maybe Final Fantasy fans may like how the usual stuff goes with Final Fantasy, so maybe we should just throw them a bone with this.
That I don't know. We don't know. We don't know which parts of the game were finished first, so only the developers would be able to answer that question, and I don't think they ever voiced themselves on that fact. So
the sad thing is that if this was also a last-minute addition, then that means that they could have added more dungeons here and there that were better.
Like I said,
ideally, Jova, again, they were going to supposedly be a DLC. They were going to add a more of a gauntlet-style dungeon inspired by the Ark, the dungeon that you do before getting to Pulse, with ideally people like Gilgamesh as bosses towards the end. A sort of a prototype to the randomized traditional indie game that you see, like say Dead Cells or or A Binding of Isaac, something kind of like that. But again, they just discarded it ultimately in favor of just recouping the data the extra data that they had for 13.2, which I kind of guess that in terms of saving time and cost, probably was more efficient as a move. But personally, kind of would have been interested to see what would have been that DLC.
That's the only thing we can do is make educated guesses. Like, the reason I'm guessing that this was the first dungeon that they properly worked on is because it's the only one that feels elaborate in its design, the only one that really feels complete, like an actual proper JRPG, whereas all the others feel like a collection of hallways. So while I don't have any evidence, I'm gonna have to take a wild guess and say that this was probably the first one they finished. And by the time they got around to design the others, it was the home stretch. We couldn't afford to waste time. Let's just go and rush the fuck out of the development.
I would subscribe more to the idea that this, in addition to the better parts of Pulse, I feel like this was just part of that last-minute addition to throw traditional Final Fantasy fans a bone, because
we do know, thanks to the first EAT trailer at E3 2006, that they at least had conceptualized a general idea about the Sunleft Waterscape was supposed to be, but that was kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, the reason I go with it is because, like, again, this is Square's own clout going for them, but maybe it was just PR, but they acted so proud, so sure that this was going to be the new way of Final Fantasy that I can't help but feel like the better parts, i.e., again, most of Pulse in this dungeon, were a last-minute addition after a lot of the backlash that, a lot of developers probably foresaw in that regard.
Basically.
Like, from their perspective, this would have been a safe bet. Have a lot of it be this way to help ease players into this new way, but also don't make it seem like we're completely taking it away. Like, here you go. It's Final Fantasy as you love it. Now, granted, there's still the idiocy that they left it at beyond the third quarter mark, let's be honest. Like, you could consider this in technically being the final quarter of the game. I mean, granted, that wouldn't account for some of the heavier stuff, but Yeah, more or less in terms of mainline game content, we are in the final quarter of the game.
Yeah, we are. It's one of the again. I know I keep repeating myself, but it really boils down to the development. Like again, when you realize the development history, suddenly the entire way the game is made, suddenly it all clicks. Yeah, exactly. So that's why the game is the way it is. It's
now that being said,
go on.
Reduced budget or not, 13.2 does not have the same excuse. Or God forbid that they had that happen to them again.
That's the thing, Joe. But 13.2 is its own can of worms in the sense that they tried their hardest to address the complaints. Problem is, they only had a year and a half of development, unlike this game's 5 years. So obviously that game was also rushed. So
even despite having that kind of backup data to rely on, meaning that they technically had less work to do, they still had to struggle in very little time. So there was
then
that.
There's the story.
Well, the story, it's its own kind of thing. It's strictly on a technical point. That's what we mentioned, just strictly on a technical point for the actual, finished software.
Mm-hmm. To go back to the side content topic, it's one of those cases. Okay, here's the thing. Usually in JRPGs, there's 3 types of side quests: the hunting quests, like the ones in this game, fetch quests, which an NPC asks you to bring him something, or some kind of mini game involved. Like, for example, the Gold Saucer is a collection of mini games, like we've already talked about.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's one of those things where, okay, if I have to do side quests as part of this main story dungeon, I'm at the very least glad that it's hunting stuff, because this is just a me thing, by the way. I'm not me personally. I don't typically like when a JRPG makes one of its mini games a part of the campaign and forces you to do that at least once, even if it's just once. I feel like mini games in JRPGs work better when they're left as an optional thing when you actually feel like doing them. Because for as much as I love Final Fantasy IX, one thing that I don't care for is at one point where the game forces you to win 2 Tetra Master matches, aka the card game. We had to win 2 matches in a row of Tetra Master. And if you're like me at the first time and you weren't even bothering with those cards, yeah, you can get to a point where you have a shitty deck, so it's going to be it can be a bit of trouble. Again, it's one of those cases where the game, I get what the game was trying to do with that, but at the same time, not so much. It's even more egregious with the fact that the moment where Zidane decides to go and enter the tournament, the card game tournament, comes out of nowhere, and never at any point in the story was ever implied that Zidane is into the card game. It's just the game wants an excuse to have you go for these 2 card matches, and that's it. So at least when it comes to this game, I'm at the very least glad that they just do hunting missions, which I think are much more acceptable for that kind of thing. Again, even the first World Ends With You, for as much as I love that game, even that game at the very least gets you to do at least 1 Tin Pin Slammer match. And don't get me wrong, I do enjoy Tin Pins. Basically, it's a Beyblade rip-off minigame too, just so you know what it is. And it's fine, but like I said, it should keep that stuff optional. Don't suddenly force a minigame down the player's throat. But that's just me. I mean, I know that a lot of people don't mind doing that, but that's just me. So I'm at the very least glad that this game just has you do hunting missions, because hunting missions are much more understandable, and it just goes along with what is the rest of the game, So I'm at the very least glad for that. Okay, let's continue. Back to the elevator, I think. Oh no, next statue.
Mm-hmm. To align more parts of the elevator.
It's a good job no one was standing underneath the statues when they were doing that. The game would end kind of abruptly.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, Hope was squished by a giant sword and died in the end.
And nobody gave a fuck.
No, and nothing of value was lost.
Well,
what did it all mean? Why?
Well, there is something we can learn from this.
Go on.
Stand underneath giant statues, you idiot.
Brilliant.
Well, yeah, I mean, you never know when they might move about, the mechanisms might move about and squish you.
What if people have no choice but to live under these mechanisms, like, say, in Xenoblade Chronicles?
Then they should really have rethought their life choices.
But some of those mechanisms are literally where they live.
Again, life choices. It probably shouldn't have got to that point in the first place.
They were born there. It's not like they could just up and leave.
Okay, how can you be
easily.
Okay, that has to be a pretty rare example. How can you be born there?
Here's another seed.
Oh, this asshole. This type of seed is special because it absorbs most of all physical attacks, if I recall correctly. So you have to rely either on magic or this traditional neutral type of magic that the commando role has, Ruin. This means that, you know, when it puts up that fucking barrier, you still cannot deal that much damage, and then starts spamming magic on its own with multicast.
So it's even worse than the space.
These early ones are relatively fine.
It's like I said before too. The only way this game has of quote-unquote raising the difficulty is by turning the enemies into bigger sponges, basically.
Like, it's not even a case of sponges. This one actually puts up barriers because, as you can see, the moment you stagger it, it goes down. You know, in a second.
It's a I know it's a barrier too, but let's face it. When you mechanically speaking, it's just another way of making the enemy a sponge. Really, it's just
True. Although I would prefer this rather than just fill in the stagger gauge. In here, you have to take extra step. It can be potential. It is actually annoying because you have to deal with a lot of shit at once. But I can understand the thought process in actually trying to make the game not the enemy difficult in a different way than just say, oh, it has a bigger requirement for the stagger gauge.
All right.
But yeah, when it comes instead to the mini games, with me, I'm kind of a bit all over the place, gotta be honest, because sometimes I do not mind like the card game stuff of both. Okay, I have to admit, the Tetramaster is I kind of prefer the mini game for the card game from 8,
Triple Triad.
Triple Triad, because it's a bit more intuitive. Tetramaster, unfortunately, is just down to you at the beginning with the Jack, alleyway Jack, basically giving you a very brief and not at all intuitive kind of explanation, and then you have to deal with a lot more complex symbols and strategy compared to Triple Triad. On the long run, it's fine, and I agree it's a bit better because compared to Triple Triad, you don't have to deal with the bullshit of randomized rules, that can easily fuck you over. But on its own, it's basically a case of it has a steeper level of starting point, but it stays consistent over in Triple Triad starting easy.
So let's show off Shiva.
The Shiva sister.
The motorcycle.
Yeah.
We didn't actually see the beginning of the summon last time we used it, so might as well.
So, which one is you guys' favorite Eidolon?
For this game specifically,
I guess Odin. I don't know.
It's tough. Each of them has merits, and
Actually, no. I think I'll go with Alexander. I mean, it doesn't look like Alexander, but at the same time, it looks cool on its own, I guess. So.
Each has their own merits. For example, I could say Hecaton care because it transforms into a magic Decarbon, which is a cool Easter egg and everything. But this is compensated by Vanille screaming.
Mr. Enemy, seeing as the game doesn't portray time as being frozen while the transformation takes place, you could have just shot it while they were transforming.
Anime transformation logic. Every time there's a transformation in an anime, the rest of the world ceases existing until the transformation is over.
Well, Pedro, Power Rangers once or twice did the thing when the monsters just shot the Rangers mid-transformation.
That was because it had become so formulaic that they needed some kind of thing to spice up the formula.
And that was in Ninja Storm, aka probably the most formulaic Power Rangers season, at least in the Disney.
Oh, I'm curious, dude. What was your favorite Power Ranger season?
That's actually a pretty good question. I mean, there are a few decent contenders. There's
Let me guess, it's totally Turbo, isn't it?
To me, it doesn't get any better than Space and Lost Galaxy, because those seasons were awesome.
I have a nostalgia passion, just because I grew up with Wild Force, even though...
What's over Turbo? Turbo's a Tale of Two series. The first off, where it was just the absolute dreck, And the second half they got better, but still had bits and pieces of that first half Drek in it, like the bit where the Rangers were cooked into a giant pizza.
You know,
And yes, I know it was like Sentai footage, but you don't have to use it.
You know, it just figures. The first time a black man gets to be the Red Ranger, and it had to be freaking Turbo of all things.
I do also have a slight soft spot for Turbo, but again, mostly because it was the series that I watched, one of the series that I watched the most as a kid. So,
And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just Turbo has problems.
in that case, I would probably need to rewatch it with a more critical eye. That's what I'm saying. But to finish quickly what I was saying before, conversely, on the other end instead, something like Blitzball pisses me off to no end.
Oh, definitely. Don't even get me started on Blitzball.
It has its fans, so I don't want to, piss them off on their own, but I simply cannot really get into it. And I know that it's such a big part of the world of 10, in terms of...
I will say this, though.
Hold on, just to clarify, too, when you say you don't like Blitzball, you're talking about playing it itself or the sport in general and the lore and all that?
The playing itself. I don't mind. If anything, it's kind of a cool thing that in universe they mention that they need something to alleviate
definitely.
Their preoccupation in terms of a sport. It's actually pretty logical.
Definitely. The story function of the game is perfectly fine. It's the gameplay aspect of it that's the problem.
Not to mention, it doesn't help contribute to some characterizations, particularly of the two major male characters, Tidus and Waka, to be essentially kind of like jocks. In case of Tidus, to make him... Okay, naive, let's go with naive.
He's the world champ!
No, let's go with naive in that case. And with Waka... God, I think it doesn't get better. It doesn't get, any lighter in talking to him as in blatantly racist. That's the entire fulcrum of his characterization. Him being, extremely racist against the Albed, and sure, when he actually sees the truth, starting to actually change to that. But it contributes to a stereotype that he's a sport-esque jock, clearly inspired by American media from the 70s
that being said,
and 80s.
I will say...
Fine enough with their developments, but I can see your point.
I will give it credit that at the very least with the Blitzball stuff, when you have those matches, if I remember, granted I haven't played in a while, so I might, if I remember correctly, you can lose the tournament right from the get-go, and the game will just move on. So it's not like you're forced to actually get good at it. If you don't like it, you can just lose on purpose and the story will move on. Unlike because in Regiment, in 9, you have to win at least 2 of the 3 matches before you can move on.
I will say this, so the matches that get thrown to you at the beginning of this spree are piece easy, even for the standards of a game, but it gets kept to the point to the fact that the third one is an entire deck of Outlaws, which is the shit the entire game. It's like fighting against 6 Magikarp in a Pokemon game.
I guess, it's just that I don't like I just don't like it based on the principle.
I understand that, although, mind you, for 10, at least with 9, it's mostly also just bragging rights. If I recall correctly, it does add up to the rare counter that the 4-end tends to have later on for the late game, but it's very minimal in terms of reward that you get.
And in fact,
with Blitzball instead, you're kind of required to actually get good at it if you want to get Waka's best weapon and actually power it up to the max.
True. But the thing is, that being said, I will also say, like we just said, Blitzball at the very least is explaining the story and it makes sense in context and everything. Like I've said, Zidane on the other hand just suddenly decides to enter this card game tournament that he has never talked about before. That has never been a part of his character at all.
I think we mentioned this in the past in some capacity, but throughout the course of the game, it's Vivi who showcased
exactly.
The more interested in. Mind you, story-wise, it's told, if I recall, it's Freya who tells to Zidane that he needs to do that to distract himself from all the preoccupation that he's having, because it's a critical kind of moment where he can stop thinking about, Garnet, but since he's kind of a dork, he doesn't know how to express his feelings properly.
That's the thing too, Freya tells him that, But then, but it's not like she suggests that he enters the tournament. No, he decides to enter the tournament just out of nowhere, out of his own initiative. That's the weird part. Nobody suggests it to him.
Oh, hey, you're still here.
It's just one of those things you can.
Guys, what the fuck are you doing?
What?
See, it's one of those things, Teo, where...
And it's not like we even get to fight the Dahaka directly. These statues take him out here. Like, why doesn't this guy just, try and attack us when we're more vulnerable?
Bye.
He saved us again.
Yeah.
What a great contribution! Yes!
Yeah.
Guys, it's
My
dark
work
in
here is
here.
done.
Guys, it's dark in here. Yeah.
Jova, I'm wet from the rain.
Yeah. Squibs, I'm hot from the sun.
Oh, there, dipshits.
I know, right?
He literally
here
has to
lies
point them
Ebenezer
towards-
Scrooge. What?
He's gone.
Blessings. The way's clear.
Right.
Okay, yeah, okay, I'm really starting to think that this whole thing was really just a last-minute addition, because the dialogue in this particular dungeon
There's literally, in general,
especially-
Jova, there's no real story progression in this. The closest you get, as you may have noticed from the cutscenes, is that Vanille kinda empathize with the Menirim, because if I recall correctly, it's gonna be explained later,
Also-
if not has been for a while. They are basically spirits trapped inside these statues.
Also remember, Jova, the game content technically was developed first. They only tried to justify its existence in the story later. So yeah, you can argue that maybe the dungeon itself was finished earlier, but the actual story part of said dungeon was like and the writers struggled in trying to justify what happens story-wise, basically.
I guess when you get down to it, a lot of these dungeons do seem a bit interchangeable to the point where this probably could have just taken place in some random cyber temple or something on Cocoon.
Not even
Remember, Jova.
Also spot on, because Jova, the way this dungeon ends and now it's connected to the next location, Urba, it doesn't really showcase that. It's kind of borderline Dark Souls 2 level of how is this, and making questioning how the two are connected.
Remember, according to the art director, they had a crap ton of content that they made while without even knowing where it will go in the game, in the content. Meaning, for all we know, maybe when they this dungeon was made on its own with no regard for story justification or context, because at the time the developers didn't know. So by the time they were on to putting this dungeon in the game, okay, let's just put it, we'll figure out some place in the story with context that we can... Again, the story aspect of this part of the game was figured out later, after the dungeon was already finished. And whereas of course the ideal way of designing a game would be for the game designers and the writers to actually work together and actually realize... Again, that's the big problem. And to go back to the previous... That's the thing too. To me, when it comes to that thing with the Tetramaster thing, it really showcases how Hiroyuki Ito is a game director first and a scenario director second, because yeah, you can tell that Ito is more of a gameplay guy rather than a storytelling guy. Matsuno's departure from 12 in particular, probably... again, we don't know how 12 would have been if Matsuno had stayed on, but again, it's one of those cases where it really... And remember, in the Wildlands of Few Games Tale, he's the game director, whereas Kondo and Nomura do all the story parts. So that way, Hito can just do what he knows and not have to worry about contextualizing story or anything. He can just do his thing, and Nomura and Kondo will take care of the rest, basically. So, all right, tune in for the next part where we finish the dungeon, everybody.
Yeah.